Saints Row is a series that I have a lot of love and nostalgia for, especially when it comes to Saints Row 3 and 4. Both of those games released during my high school years, so they really hit at the perfect time for me to fully enjoy and appreciate their absurdity. So already being a fan of the series, and just loving open world games in general, I've well and truly been ready for a new Saints Row game, especially seeing as the series has been laying dormant since 2015's Gat Out of Hell. But when this reboot was finally revealed last year, it was met with a lot of backlash, with many longtime Saints Row fans worrying that this reboot was too much of a departure from the prior Saints Row games, and feeling like it had lost a lot of the personality that made Saints Row special to begin with. But despite it looking very different than I expected, I still remained optimistic about this game. Sure, it didn't look like classic Saints Row, but change isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I thought the gameplay still looked like a lot of fun. I even gave this game a spot on my most anticipated games of 2022 list. Unfortunately, after beating the story and spending countless hours exploring its open world, I'm saddened to say that Saints Row is everything that its detractors feared it would be. Saints Row commits the ultimate sin of a bad reboot by losing all semblance of the series' identity in order to chase trends and emulate other, better games, which makes Saints Row feel like a game designed by committee with no unique artistic vision of its own. And while the gameplay is more than competent, it's constantly let down by repetitive missions, open world design that feels like it's been ripped out of a game from 10 years ago, and an endless laundry list of bugs that range from annoying to completely game-breaking, which is particularly bad news for Volition, who really needed a win after the critical and commercial flop that was Agents of Mayhem. Saints Row actually begins in a promising fashion with its character creator. Some of my most dominant memories of Saints Row 3 and 4 are of the robust character creators that were found in those games, and I was pleased to see that this new Saints Row offers the most varied and impressive character creation in the series yet, allowing you to truly make your character your own, whether the character you're envisioning is a badass action hero or a brutish monstrosity. You can customize just about everything on your character, from the things you'd expect like facial structure, body type, hair, tattoos, scars and makeup, to more granular details like their muscle definition and the prominence of their veins. You can even change their nipples and adjust the size of their genitals, which is pretty on brand for Saints Row. Character creation is just scratching the surface of ways you can customize your character's appearance in Saints Row, as you can also change your character into a near endless selection of outfits. And the costumes are one of the few areas where you can see the silliness of the Saints Row games of old shining through. Want to run around in a gimp suit? Go ahead. Want to cause chaos dressed as a giant ice cream cone? Knock yourself out. Hell, you can run around buck-ass naked if you want to. Once you get into gameplay, you'll immediately notice that both the crassness and overall ridiculousness has been toned down significantly from the last couple of Saints Row games. There's no superpowers or aliens to fight, and there's not a dubstep gun or dildo bat in sight. It feels like this reboot was aiming to strike a balance between the smaller scale crime stories of the first couple of Saints Row games and the sheer insanity of Saints Row 3 and 4. But toning things down this far feels like a regression for the Saints Row series. It took Saints Row a few games to find its own voice and stop feeling like a GTA clone. But with this game, Saints Row feels like it's once again living in the shadow of other open world games. Though this time, it's not just Grand Theft Auto it's mimicking, it's Watch Dogs as well. And frankly, this game just doesn't hold a candle to a game like Grand Theft Auto 5 or even Watch Dogs 2. The real shame of it is that Saints Row's gameplay is actually pretty damn good. The addition of mantling, vaulting, and a wingsuit that lets you glide across the map with ease makes traversal feel much more fluid than prior Saints Row games. The wingsuit is a particularly great addition. There's launch points scattered all over the world, which makes it easy to get into the air from nearly anywhere on the map, and gliding straight into an enemy and performing a takedown was never not satisfying. This new Saints Row's fast and violent combat is also an improvement over previous games in the series. The gunplay, while nothing remarkable, still feels solid, and I really liked the flashy melee takedowns and special abilities that let you do things like stuff a grenade down an enemy's pants before tossing them back at their allies. Well, at least I did really like the takedowns until they completely broke on me, and whenever I attempted one, my character would just be performing the takedown on the air, while the enemy flailed around on the floor. Initially, I saw a lot of promise in Saints Row, and I was genuinely enjoying myself for the first handful of missions. Unfortunately, that fun didn't last, as it quickly dawned on me that I was just doing the same types of missions over and over again. There's just so little in terms of mission variety here, and the missions aren't offering anything that we haven't seen done a million times before in other open world games. A huge missed opportunity in Saints Row is its selection of weapons. Don't get me wrong, there's not a shortage of them to choose from. In fact, there's tons of weapons in Saints Row, but the vast majority are just plain boring. There's an assortment of assault rifles, pistols, shotguns, SMGs, and all the other bog standard guns that you'd expect to find in an open world game. There are a couple of more interesting weapons and gadgets, like a firework gun and a football-shaped device with a thruster that attaches to enemies and sends them flying back, allowing you to cause some Just Cause-esque hijinks, but there's nothing remotely as creative as the squid guns and inflato rays of prior games. And unfortunately, some of the more unique weapons, like the laser gun and firework launcher, are not all that fun to use. In fact, whenever I equipped the fireworks launcher, all I could think about was how Far Cry already did this weapon and did it a lot better. Like prior Saints Row games, you'll spend a lot of time driving around the map here, and fortunately, the Arcadey Driving is another strong aspect of the gameplay, with the driving providing a real sense of speed. Cars handle well, drifting feels great, sideswiping an enemy car and seeing it burst into flames is very satisfying, and although it's been in plenty of other Saints Row games, I'll never not appreciate that you can just jump straight through a car window and start driving, which is a small detail, but it really helps the gameplay maintain momentum. I almost feel bad saying this, but I was often enjoying the driving so much that I couldn't help but think, I wish these driving mechanics could be ripped out and put into a different, better open world game. Ironically, vehicles suffer from the same pitfall as the weapons, where some of the more exciting looking vehicles are the least enjoyable to use. When I unlocked the hoverboard, I imagined that it would be my main vehicle for the rest of the game. I mean, who doesn't want to ride a hoverboard? There are very few concepts as inherently cool as hoverboards. But once I actually hopped on it, I was shocked by how sluggish and unsatisfying it felt to control, which led to me ditching it immediately in favour of the car I had previously been using. There are some genuinely fun set-piece moments found in the story missions of Saints Row. One early section I particularly enjoyed saw me taking out a convoy of trucks, having shootouts with motorcyclists while clinging to the roofs of cars, and jumping from vehicle to vehicle clearing out enemies. This section almost feels like a dollar store Uncharted set piece, which sounds like an insult, but I love Uncharted, so anything that can even remotely mirror those games is usually pretty enjoyable to me. Unfortunately, Saints Row has a bad tendency of repeating its initially clever mission ideas over and over again to diminishing returns, until all the fun has been sucked out of them. A great example of this is the LARP missions. There's a series of missions that see the Saints participating in a city-wide, Mad Max-inspired LARP, where you fight with non-lethal weapons that cause headshots to end in a burst of confetti rather than blood. The first of these missions was great, but instead of leaving it as one awesome, memorable standalone mission, the joke gets beaten into the ground over a series of missions. And for every fun set-piece driven mission, there's a tedious, frustrating mission that forces you to drag cargo behind your car on a tether without letting it get destroyed by bumping into things. There are also other missions, like one board game themed level later in the game, that are great ideas let down by half-baked level design, which among many other problems makes it abundantly clear that this game was simply not ready for the limelight and probably needed another year of development time. Dismantling the operations of various opposing gangs by completing an assortment of side activities has always been a core element of Saints Row, and in the past we've had some memorable opposition in the form of gangs like the Luchadors, the Deckers, and the Morningstar. Unfortunately, in this new Saints Row, there are only 3 enemy factions, and they could not be more generic and forgettable if they tried. You've got the Idols, a group decked out in LED masks and other tech that looks ripped straight from Watch Dogs 2, the Los Panteros, who are your stereotypical gangbangers, and Marshall Defense Industries, a private security firm made up of soldiers for hire that your character is working for before deciding to build their own criminal empire with their roommates. If the new factions are going to be this uninspired, I'd honestly rather they just went back and used the gangs from the older games. While the desert map could have easily been one of the more boring aspects of Saints Row, and was one of the aspects of the game I was most apprehensive about before playing it, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked the city of Santo Ileso. It's hard to create environments that are arid but not boring, but Saints Row manages to pull it off. While huge swaths of the map are barren deserts, it owns this, and manages to use the desolate location to its advantage, creating large stretches that are fun to tear through in off-road vehicles, giving this map a unique look and feel, which is one of the few things that differentiates Saints Row from its open world peers. The only major gripe I have with the open world is the sandstorms that occasionally kick up in the desert. It's just not fun to be wandering around the desert, unable to see 3 feet in front of you. I get that this is a thing that happens in deserts, but come on, this isn't Spec Ops The Line. I'm not looking for realism in a Saints Row game. Unfortunately, while the map may look different to other open world games, it's filled with repetitive and uninspired side activities that feel plucked from a PS3 era Ubisoft game. Among these activities are the wingsuit saboteur missions that see you gliding between various locations to blow up satellites, wanted missions where you have to assassinate set targets, often within a time limit, Pony Express missions where you race through a time trial while avoiding the cops that are attempting to stop you, riding shotgun missions where you'll need to protect the driver of a car by taking out enemy vehicles, choplifting missions where you're in a helicopter stealing vehicles with a giant magnet, and an activity where you have to leave negative reviews for businesses that are owned by rival factions, at which point members from that gang will come and attack you. The fewer stars you give a business, the more challenging the fight will be, but the better the reward for completing it is. This activity is yet another example of the game implementing ideas that would feel more at home in a Watch Dogs game than a Saints Row game. I do appreciate the ideas behind some of these activities. Choplifting, for instance, is the kind of ridiculous concept that'd fit right in one of the older Saints Row games. It's just a shame that trying to line up the magnet is so cumbersome that I always dreaded doing this activity. In fact, every side activity in this game quickly loses its luster after doing it a couple of times, as the game doesn't do anything to make the different instances of the side activities feel unique or dynamic. There's also a staggering amount of collectibles to be found across Santo Ileso in the form of drug caches, dumpster dives, and landmarks to photograph. There are even objects that once photographed can be used to decorate your home base, letting you make the crib that the Saints dwell in feel uniquely yours. I've platinumed so many open world games, and that's often involved ticking off countless repetitive challenges. But the side activities and collectibles in Saints Row are so tedious that I couldn't imagine investing the time required to platinum this game, even if it was just something I was doing in the background while listening to podcasts. One of the first things that people picked up on with the trailers for Saints Row is that this reboot was significantly scaling back the raunchy humour that the series is known for. Obviously, the previous Saints Row games are very of their time, so I can see why Volition wouldn't want to lean into the overly edgy humour of prior Saints Row games, but they've toned it down to the point that this reboot has lost all of the franchise's personality. For whatever reason, they've decided to substitute the blue humour of the prior games with a very grating style of humour that's clearly trying to mirror the comedy of Watch Dogs 2. I loved Watch Dogs 2, but the comedy in that game was hit or miss to begin with, and this feels like a cheap imitation that lacks even the occasional laughs I got out of that game. I understand that it's harder to nail comedy in a video game than any other medium, because comedy is all about timing, and when the player has a lot of agency over their character's actions, it can be difficult to get a joke to land, but it's still certainly possible for games to achieve this. Both of the Portal games are funny, the South Park games are hilarious, and even the prior Saints Row games had their moments. Even though Saints Row hits you with an endless barrage of jokes, I can honestly say that I didn't laugh once, or even crack a smile for that matter, largely because I knew every lazy joke this game was going to make before it even made it. Nowhere is Watch Dogs 2's influence on this game more apparent than with the protagonist's terribly written roommates. These painfully unfunny characters are clearly just a desperate attempt to catch the attention of millennials. You have the moron of the group, Kevin, and boy did Volition think the jokes about Kevin never wearing a shirt were funnier than they actually are. The generic nerd Eli, and Nina, who basically feels like if Darcy from the Thor movies was a getaway driver. And while Nina is definitely the least vexing member of the group, I still can't say that I actually liked her, and that's a huge problem. Saints Row attempts to get you to care more about these characters by having you spend some quality time with them through loyalty missions, and by completing these missions you'll upgrade the characters' weapons, making them more powerful when they're fighting alongside you. The problem is, I didn't like these characters, so I didn't want to spend more time with them, and playing through these missions did absolutely nothing to change my mind about this cast. I can honestly say that there's not a single memorable character in this game, which is just embarrassing when you think of all the characters that populated the casts of prior Saints Row games. It's been years since I played those games, and I still remember characters like Pierce, Shaundy, and Johnny Gat. Whereas with this cast, I know that I probably won't even remember their names in a few months' time. Saints Row is also the buggiest game released since Cyberpunk 2077, and even then, I encountered more bugs here than I did playing Cyberpunk at launch. There's constantly textures glitching out, I repeatedly got stuck to cars while riding atop of them, my clothing clipped through vehicles, buildings in the distance frequently flickered, my clothes would constantly change back to formerly equipped ones out of nowhere, my objectives list would break and show the objectives from prior missions, all my weapons kept unequipping themselves, leading to me running into missions completely unarmed without noticing, my perks also unequipped themselves between missions, all my ammo would randomly disappear, NPCs would turn invisible in cutscenes, enemies would become unkillable, forcing me to reload checkpoints, at one point my controls just stopped working entirely, and the game hard crashed my PS5 several times. And this isn't even every bug I encountered. But hey, at least the music isn't bad in this game. The theme song is great, and there's a surprisingly large amount of licensed music on the radio stations. And as a big metal fan, I was pleasantly surprised by just how much metalcore and deathcore this game's soundtrack had to offer. You can even make custom playlists of all your favourite tracks, though for some reason you have to get to a certain point in the game to unlock the ability to make playlists. And of course, like everything else in this goddamn game, the playlist app also stopped working for me altogether eventually. There are kernels of a good game in Saints Row, but it just misses the mark in so many ways that it's impossible to recommend this game to anybody. While Saints Row plays well, its paint-by-numbers open-world design and abysmal writing means that even if it wasn't a complete technical disaster, it still wouldn't be a very good game. And down the line, when I get the urge to revisit a Saints Row game, it'll still be Saints Row 3 or 4, and not this. Because this game just doesn't feel like a Saints Row game. It's lost all semblance of the series' identity in order to chase trends. By scaling down the absurdity of Saints Row, Volition haven't made a game that feels more focused, they've just made a game that feels more mundane. Saints Row is one of the worst reboots in recent memory, and will no doubt be used as a prime example of why people fear reboots of beloved franchises for years to come. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can also find countless other reviews on my channel, including my recent review of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Shredder's Revenge. And be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming reviews of Stray, Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed, and Gotham Knights.